Hello and welcome to Crime Watch Daily Updates. I'm your host, Anna Garcia. On July 15th of 1997, University of North Texas student Kelli Ann Cox visited the Denton County Jail with her criminology class as part of a field trip. When the 20-year-old left, she realized that she couldn't get into her car, so she called her boyfriend on a nearby payphone to ask him to pick her up. But when he got there, she was nowhere to be found. Detectives looked into her boyfriend, but he was cleared of suspicion. Several other women disappeared around the same time as Kelli did, both in Texas and in Oklahoma, but Kelli's case went cold. Over time, investigators found their way to a man named William Reece from Oklahoma, who had previously been convicted of sexual assault and released from prison. He also turned out to be a serial killer. In September 2015, William was arrested in Oklahoma after a DNA swab linked him to the murder of Tiffany Johnston, a 19-year-old who vanished while at a car wash on June 26 of 1997. Investigators found her body the next day and learned that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. 5 months later, in February of 2016, William agreed to talk to investigators about the murders, but wanted to make sure that he would not be given the death penalty. Detectives found the remains of another victim, Jessica Cain, on March 18th of 2016. And then on April 1st, they located Kelli. William went to trial on May of 2021 for the murder of Tiffany Johnston, and a jury convicted him. He was also given the death penalty in Oklahoma. In June of 2022, he went on trial in Texas and pleaded guilty to killing Kelli Cox, Jessica Cain, and a 12-year-old named Laura Smither. He was handed 3 life sentences. Let's look back at the case of Kelli Ann Cox and a serial killer who will never again see life on the other side of those prison walls.
It's called the Highway to Hell, a scary 50-mile stretch between Houston and Galveston, Texas, littered with mystery and misery. It cuts through a mix of murky swamps, old farms, and abandoned oil fields, making it the perfect dumping ground for dead bodies. 30 women have disappeared along this lonely highway, some found in shallow graves near a place locals call the Texas Killing Field. They are mostly young, pretty, and brunette. For years, police have wondered if it's the work of one sadistic serial killer or a handful of evil copycats. Jan Bynum keeps a yellow ribbon in the front yard of her home in Farmers Branch, Texas. Her daughter, Kelli Cox, is one of the missing.
I've said for years, I will not give up hope until there is absolute proof that she's gone, that she's dead. I won't.
Kelli, a young single mom who just happened to be a pretty brunette.
She was pretty amazing young lady. She was very focused, had a plan.
Kelli spent her morning studying at the University of North Texas and the rest of her days being mom to daughter Alexis.
Having a child that young is not ideal, but she didn't let that stop her.
July 15th started like any other for Kelli. It was a school day. Her uncle snapped this picture of Kelli and Alexis moments before they raced out the door.
I said, well, I love you, honey. Have a good day. I'll talk to you this afternoon. Those were my last words.
Kelli dropped 19-month-old Alexis at a babysitter's, then drove to Denton Prison for a field trip with her criminology class. Her professor told the students not to bring phones, keys, or personal items to the prison.
He said, get a ride over here, take a cab, use a hide-a-key. And she used the hide-a-key.
According to Kelli's boyfriend, Lawrence Harris III, he and Kelli had a spare key made. They tested it the night before the tour to make sure it worked, and then hid the little magnetic box in the wheel well of her beige 240SX.
She locked everything in her trunk and then went on the tour.
After the tour, Kelli heads back to her car. And that's when Officer Shane Kaiser says the story takes a bizarre turn.
She would have walked down the sidewalk on the south end of the building and come to this parking lot that's behind us where her car was parked at the time. She was unable to get her car unlocked.
That spare car key that had worked just hours before now mysteriously would not open Kelli's car.
She ended up coming back across the street. She came to this business here, which at the time was Rick's Drive-In. She went in and got changed, came back out and used the payphone.
Kelli calls her boyfriend Lawrence for help.
His exact words were, she called and she said, the key won't work. Can you bring me another key and help me get into my car? And so that's what he was doing.
Lawrence claims he drives straight to the prison, and when he arrives 35 minutes later, Kelli's car is in the parking lot, but she's nowhere to be found.
It just didn't make any sense. It'd be like Martians came down and just picked her up, poofed her away. Because people remember her at the payphone, and that's the last anybody remembers seeing her.
By 5:30 that afternoon, Kelli's mom's heart is pounding.
I knew absolutely, without a doubt, that there was something wrong, because that's when she had to pick Alexis up at the babysitter.
Police begin questioning those closest to Kelli.
We're going to look at anyone that she may be seeing, any close friends that she spends time with, and her boyfriend was one of those.
But Lawrence passes 4 polygraph tests, and police eliminate him as a suspect. Now, with no leads, no witnesses, no surveillance video, the case goes cold. Then a possible break. Cops get a tip that this man, William Reece, a convicted sex offender, had just been released from prison. A credit card receipt from a gas station put the trucker in Denton the day Kelli disappeared. But the hot tip quickly goes cold.
They didn't find any evidence of her fingerprints in his truck, so basically that was the extent of looking at William Reece.
For years, Jan's heart would sink every time a body was discovered in that Texas killing field, or even when a kidnapped victim like Elizabeth Smart returned home.
Every single day you ask that question, is today the day that she's going to come through the door, she's going to call on the phone, or the police department's going to call, and we have answers.
But the hardest part for Jan was explaining to little Alexis that her mommy is lost.
She drew pictures of Kelli, and she said, Nana, here's pictures. I drew pictures for posters to go up in the park to look for Mommy. And it was, I mean, when I look at those pictures, it just brings tears to my eyes.
I would just tell her I love her and I missed her.
Then, finally, this February, almost 19 years after Kelli disappeared, police finally make that terrible call to Jan, and a familiar face comes back to haunt her.
He said, yes, it is, William Reece who we're looking at.
Yes, the same William Reece cops originally suspected all those years ago. He's serving 60 years in a Texas prison for kidnapping a woman. DNA has just linked him to another murder in Oklahoma. Reece's attorney, Anthony Osso, says his client doesn't want to face the death penalty and offers to tell cops where he buried the bodies of 2 missing young women, Jessica Kane and Kelli Cox, if they agree not to execute him.
You've had those times over 19 years where something seemed positive and then ends up leading to nothing, and so then you kind of let down. And so I think especially with our investigators, they went with a cautious but optimistic approach.
Reece leads investigators to an area not far from the highway to hell, where they do find Jessica Kane's body. And then Reece takes police to an old farm nearby where he says he buried Kelli.
I've always been asked, well, do you hope those are her remains? If she's gone and those are her remains, I want them to find them, and I want them to identify them.
In a shallow grave, they find Kelli.
My hope was completely taken away when they found remains where Mr. Reece said they would, and they came back with the dental and said, it's Kelli. There's no doubt it's Kelli.
Jan finally had her answer.
I can be comforted that I know she's in God's arms, and I can bring her home and put her to rest the way I want to.
Jan and her husband Niles later adopted Alexis. The cute toddler Kelli left behind is now a young woman. As for that yellow ribbon, Jan is keeping it up, hoping the other girls out there in the Texas fields make it home too.
And I miss her a lot. I also know I was blessed with 20 years with her. And thank God for that.